Commander Sarah Chen stared at the view screen as her ship dropped out of hyperspace. The planet below looked like hell itself. Dark red clouds swirled around a world that seemed to glow with inner fire. Lightning flashed constantly across the surface and even from orbit. She could see massive storms that never ended. Scanners are picking up something strange. "Commander," said Lieutenant Torres from the sensor station. His voice carried a hint of confusion. "The atmospheric readings don't match our records. The air is still toxic, but it's different than 50 years ago." Sarah nodded slowly. She had studied every report about this planet before coming here. Kepler 442c, nicknamed Infernus by everyone who knew about it. A death world where nothing was supposed to live. The gravity was 3 times stronger than Earth. The air would kill a human in minutes. The creatures that lived here were nightmares that could tear apart a battle tank. "Take us down to the landing coordinates," she ordered. "But keep the engines ready. We might need to leave quickly." As the ship descended through the poisonous clouds, Sarah thought about why they were here. 3 years ago, the Zephyrian Empire had simply vanished. Not destroyed in war, not conquered by enemies. They had just disappeared. Every single one of their worlds stood empty. Their mighty fleets floated dead in space. No one knew what happened to them. The disappearance had thrown the galaxy into chaos. The Zephyrians had been the strongest military power for over 200 years. Without them, dozens of smaller species were fighting for control. Trade routes were falling apart. Pirates attacked civilian ships without fear. Some worlds had already fallen to raiders. That was why Sarah was here on this forgotten death world. 50 years ago, something terrible had happened on Infernus. The human government needed to know if it was connected to the Zephyrian disappearance. The ship touched down on a flat area of black rock. Through the thick windows, Sarah could see the hellish landscape. Rivers of lava flowed in the distance. Strange plants with thorns as long as swords grew from cracks in the ground. The sky was the color of dried blood. "Atmospheric suits ready, Commander," reported Sergeant Martinez, the team security chief. "But the gravity is going to be rough. We'll move slow and tire fast." Sarah put on her heavy suit and checked the seals twice. The air outside would burn her lungs in seconds. The gravity would make every step feel like carrying 2 other people on her back. But they had a job to do. The team stepped outside into hell. Each footstep felt like walking through thick mud. The ground was hot enough that she could feel it through her boots. In the distance, something roared. It sounded like a cross between a lion and a spaceship engine. "This way," Sarah said, reading her scanner. "The crash site should be 2 kilometers north." They walked slowly across the burning landscape. Every few minutes, one of them had to stop and rest. The gravity was crushing. Sarah's legs ached after just half an hour of walking. But as they got closer to their destination, something strange happened. The ground became smoother. The dangerous plants were gone. Someone had cleared a path. "Commander," whispered Torres, "these burn marks on the rocks. They're not natural. Someone used energy weapons here." Sarah knelt down and touched one of the marks. It was old, but not 50 years old. Maybe 5 years at most. Someone was fighting here recently. They reached the top of a small hill and looked down into a valley. What they saw made everyone stop breathing. There, in the valley below, were the ruins of a massive battle. Broken pieces of Zephyrian warships were scattered across the ground like giant metal bones. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was that someone had built a settlement in the middle of the wreckage. Metal buildings rose from the ground, clearly made from salvaged ship parts. Solar collectors gleamed on rooftops. Gardens grew in protected areas, somehow thriving in this poisonous world. Smoke rose from chimneys, meaning people were living down there. "Impossible," breathed Martinez. "Nothing can live on this planet. The radiation alone should kill anything in days." Sarah raised her binoculars and studied the settlement more carefully. She could see people moving around down there. They wore light clothing instead of the heavy suits her team needed. They walked normally in the crushing gravity that was making her team struggle. "Look at how they move," she said softly. "They're not struggling with the gravity at all. It's like they were born here." Torres checked his scanner again. "Commander, I'm reading human life signs. Lots of them. But the readings are strange. Their bone density is off the charts. Their muscle mass is incredible. They're like humans, but different." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the toxic wind. She knew the history of this planet. 50 years ago, during the war against the Void Swarm, 500,000 human soldiers had been stationed here. They were some of the best warriors humanity had ever produced. Elite fighters who had helped turn the tide of the war. Then the Zephyrians had betrayed them. During a massive battle, the alien fleet had suddenly pulled back, leaving the humans stranded on Infernus. The official story was that Void Swarm forces had broken through and the retreat was necessary. But some people always suspected the truth. The Zephyrians had been afraid. Human soldiers were too good, too innovative, too dangerous. After the war ended, the aliens didn't want to share power with a species that could outfight them. So they had left the humans here to die. Everyone assumed they had died quickly. Infernus was supposed to be impossible to survive on. For 50 years, no one had even tried to check. We need to get closer, Sarah decided. But carefully, we don't know if they're friendly. As they climbed down into the valley, Sarah noticed more signs of long-term habitation. The settlement was much bigger than it had looked from above. Buildings extended deep into the hillsides. Carefully tended fields stretched between the structures. This wasn't a desperate survivor camp. This was a thriving community. A figure appeared on a ridge above them. Then another. Soon, dozens of people were watching the team from high positions. They didn't look threatened. They looked curious. One of them began climbing down toward the team. As he got closer, Sarah could see that Torres had been right. The man was clearly human, but different. He was tall and powerfully built, with dense muscle that spoke of a lifetime in heavy gravity. His skin was darker than normal, probably from radiation adaptation. His eyes were sharp and alert. "Welcome to Infernus," the man said in perfect English. His voice was calm and friendly. "We've been wondering when someone would finally come looking for us." Sarah removed her helmet despite Martinez's worried protest. The air burned her throat, but she could breathe it for a short time. "My name is Commander Sarah Chen, Earth Defense Force. Who are you?" The man smiled. "My name is David Steele. My grandfather was Colonel Marcus Steele of the 3rd Human Marine Division. You might have heard of him. He was one of the 500,000 soldiers the Zephyrians abandoned here 50 years ago." Sarah felt her heart skip. "Abandoned? Then you know what really happened?" David's smile turned cold. "Oh yes, Commander. We know exactly what happened. The question is, do you know what's been happening since then? Do you know what we've become?" More figures appeared around them. Men and women who moved like predators, even in the crushing gravity. Children who played games that would challenge Earth's best athletes. Sarah realized she wasn't looking at survivors. She was looking at something new, something the galaxy had never seen before. Something that 50 years on a death world had forged into the most dangerous humans who had ever lived. David Steele led them deeper into the settlement, and with every step Sarah Chen felt her understanding of the universe shift. The buildings around them weren't crude shelters thrown together by desperate survivors. They were sophisticated structures that seemed to grow from the rock itself. "The air burns your throat, doesn't it?" David asked, noticing Sarah's discomfort. "Most off-worlders can't handle it for more than a few minutes. We call it the first test. If you can't breathe our air, you don't belong here." Lieutenant Torres was scanning everything with wide eyes. "These buildings are incredible. The metal has been treated somehow. It should have corroded away decades ago in this atmosphere." "We learned to work with what Infernus gives us," David explained. "The acid rain that would dissolve your ship in a year becomes a tool when you understand it. The toxic plants that would kill you with a touch become medicine when prepared correctly." They passed a group of children playing in a courtyard. Sarah stopped and stared. The kids were throwing around a ball that had to weigh 50 pounds in Earth gravity. Here, with 3 times the pull, it should have been impossible to lift. But the children tossed it easily, laughing as they played. "How old are they?" Sarah asked. "The oldest is 12, David said with obvious pride. "She can already outrun a shadow cat and climb the sheer walls of the burning canyon. By the time she's 18, she'll be able to hunt stoneback crushers with nothing but a knife." Martinez looked confused. "What are those?" David pointed to marks on a nearby wall, deep gouges in solid metal, each one as long as Sarah's arm. "Predators, the kind that used to hunt us when we first arrived. Now we hunt them." They entered a large building that had clearly been the command center of an old warship. But instead of military equipment, it housed something like a museum. The walls were covered with pictures, documents, and artifacts from 50 years ago. "This is where we keep the memory," David said softly. "So the children never forget where we came from." Sarah studied the pictures. Faces of young soldiers, Human men and women who had volunteered to fight in the Galactic War, warriors who had trusted their alien allies and died for it. But at the end of the display, the pictures changed. Instead of death, they showed adaptation, survival, growth. "How many of you are there now?" she asked. "Almost 2 million, David said. "We've grown beyond what anyone thought possible. But not just in numbers, in everything else too." He led them to a workshop where people were building things Sarah didn't recognize. The technology looked human, but advanced far beyond anything she had seen on Earth. Weapons that hummed with contained energy, armor that seemed to bend light around itself, tools that defied easy description. "We had to innovate or die," David explained. "Earth technology wasn't designed for Infernus. Zephyrian equipment failed in our environment, so we learned to make our own. 50 years of constant innovation driven by absolute necessity." Torres was practically vibrating with excitement. "These power cells are incredible. The energy density is impossible. And this weapon design, how does it even work?" "Carefully," said a new voice. They turned to see an older woman approaching. She was small and weathered, but moved with the same fluid grace as David. "I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez. I run our research division." Sarah shook the woman's hand, noting the incredible strength in her grip. "Doctor, what my lieutenant is saying, this technology seems far beyond current human capabilities." Elena smiled. "Current Earth human capabilities, yes. But we're not Earth humans anymore, Commander. 50 years of evolution in the most hostile environment in known space has changed us. Physically, mentally, technologically." She gestured for them to follow her deeper into the facility. They passed laboratories where people worked on projects that looked like science fiction. Rooms full of screens showing star charts and tactical displays. Areas where individuals trained with weapons and gravity chambers that made even Infernus look mild. "The Zephyrians made a mistake," Elena continued. "They thought abandoning us here was a death sentence. They didn't understand what humans become when they're pushed to the absolute limit and given enough time to adapt." They entered a room with a large viewing window. Beyond the glass was something that made Sarah's breath catch. It was a ship, but unlike anything she had ever seen. Sleek and predatory, with design elements that seemed to shift as she watched. "We call her the Retribution," David said quietly. "She's one of 47 vessels in our fleet. Built here, in the deep caverns below the settlement. Powered by technology that makes the old Zephyrian ships look like toys." Sarah stared at the ship, her mind racing. "You've been building a fleet?" "For 30 years, Elena confirmed. "We always knew someone would come eventually. We wanted to be ready." Martinez stepped forward, his military training taking over. "Ready for what? Invasion? Conquest?" David's expression darkened. "Ready for whatever comes next. You see, Commander, we haven't been sitting here in isolation for 50 years. We've been watching, listening, learning about what's happening in the galaxy." Elena activated a holographic display. Star charts appeared, showing ship movements and communication intercepts across known space. "We've maintained monitoring stations throughout this sector. Hidden sensor arrays that nobody knows about. We've seen everything." The display shifted to show Zephyrian space, or what used to be Zephyrian space. Now it was just empty systems with dead worlds. "We know about the disappearance," David said. "Every Zephyrian gone without a trace. No bodies, no destruction, just empty space where an empire used to be." Sarah felt a chill. "Do you know what happened to them?" "We have theories," Elena said carefully. "But first, you need to understand something important. The Zephyrians weren't the only ones watching the deep space sensors 50 years ago." The display changed again, showing sensor readings from the edge of the galaxy. Strange signals, massive objects moving in the dark between stars. "The Void Swarm," Torres whispered. "Not quite," David corrected. "The Void Swarm was the first wave, a scouting force. What's coming now is the real invasion." Sarah's legs suddenly felt weak. "You're saying the war never ended?" "The war never even began," Elena said grimly. "What we fought 50 years ago was just them testing our defenses, learning our capabilities. Now they're coming back with everything they have. David walked to the window and stared out at the ship beyond. The Zephyrians probably figured it out too late. That's why they disappeared. Not destroyed, but harvested. Their technology, their knowledge, their biological distinctiveness, all added to the swarm's capabilities. And now you're telling us they're coming for the rest of the galaxy, Sarah said. They're already here, Elena replied, calling up new sensor data. Deep space monitoring shows massive ships at the galactic rim, ships that match no known design but emit energy signatures consistent with evolved void swarm technology. Sarah looked around at the advanced technology, the powerful humans, the hidden fleet, and you've been preparing to fight them. We've been preparing to survive them, David corrected. There's a difference. Fighting implies a fair contest. What's coming isn't interested in a fair fight. Elena shut down the display. The question, now Commander, is what Earth and the other surviving species are willing to do to survive what's coming. What do you mean? Sarah asked. David turned back to face them. His expression was serious, almost sad. We mean that 50 years ago the galaxy abandoned us to die. Now that galaxy needs our help to survive, but help comes with a price. What price? Acceptance, Elena said simply. Acceptance that the humans you left behind to die are not the same species that you'll be dealing with now. We're stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than anything the galaxy has seen. And we remember being betrayed. Sarah felt the weight of those words. Looking around at the settlement, at the technology, at the people who moved like predators in a gravity that would crush normal humans, she began to understand. The galaxy hadn't just abandoned 500,000 soldiers on a death world. They had created something entirely new. Something that might be their only hope against what was coming from the dark. 3 days later, Sarah stood in the main communications center deep beneath the settlement. The room hummed with activity as dozens of technicians monitored signals from across the galaxy. The technology here was far beyond anything Earth had developed, yet it felt familiar in the way that human innovation always did. Show her the Zephyrian worlds, David requested. A technician brought up a three-dimensional map of what used to be the Zephyrian Empire. Hundreds of star systems spread across a quarter of the galaxy, each one marked with status indicators. Every single indicator showed the same thing. Empty. We've been monitoring their space for 3 years, Elena explained, joining them at the display. At first, we thought it might be a strategic withdrawal, some kind of military repositioning. But then we sent probe drones to investigate, David continued. He gestured, and the display zoomed in on one particular system. This is Zephyr Prime, their capital world. Population 12 billion. Industrial capacity that could build 1,000 warships a year. The image showed a beautiful blue and green world, cities gleaming on every continent. But the cities were dark. No lights, no movement, no life signs at all. The buildings are intact, Sarah observed. No signs of bombardment or invasion. That's what makes it so disturbing, Elena said. Whatever happened to them, it wasn't a conventional attack. There are no bodies, no destruction, no evidence of struggle. They're just gone. David brought up another image, this one showing a massive space station orbiting the planet. The Grand Fleet was stationed here when they vanished. 800 of the most advanced warships ever built. We found them floating dead in space, perfectly preserved but completely empty. Sarah studied the images with growing unease. The Zephyrians had been the dominant military power in the galaxy for centuries. They had technology that most species could only dream of. Their warriors were legendary. If something could make them all disappear without a fight, what hope did anyone else have? Do you have any theories about what happened? She asked. We have more than theories, David said grimly. We have evidence. The display changed to show sensor readings from the edge of the galaxy. Massive shapes moved in the darkness between stars. Too large to be natural, but following patterns that suggested intelligence. These readings started appearing 6 months before the Zephyrians vanished, Elena explained. Something big was moving in from deep space. We tried to warn them, but they didn't believe our sensor data. Why not? Because officially we don't exist, David said with bitter humor. Remember, we were abandoned here to die 50 years ago. As far as the galactic community knows, this planet is empty. Sarah felt a chill as the implications sank in. So when you tried to warn them about the threat, they ignored us completely, Elena confirmed. Dismissed our transmissions as hoaxes or pirates trying to create panic. The Zephyrian High Command refused to even acknowledge receiving our warnings. The display shifted again, showing energy patterns and ship movements from the weeks before the disappearance. The data was complex, but even Sarah could see the coordinated nature of what had happened. It wasn't random, she realized. Whatever took them, it was planned. Coordinated across hundreds of worlds simultaneously. Exactly, David said. And it required inside knowledge of Zephyrian defensive positions, fleet movements, and civilian populations. This wasn't an external invasion. It was something that had been studying them for a long time. Torres, who had been quietly studying the technical readouts, looked up with alarm. Commander, these energy signatures, they're similar to Void Swarm technology, but more advanced. Much more advanced. Elena nodded approvingly. Very good, Lieutenant. You're starting to understand. The Void Swarm we fought 50 years ago was just the beginning. They've been evolving, learning, growing stronger. But how? Sarah asked. We defeated them, scattered their fleets, destroyed their hive ships. We defeated their first wave, David corrected. What we didn't understand at the time was that the Void Swarm doesn't reproduce like other species. They evolve. Every defeat makes them stronger. Every victory teaches them new strategies. Elena brought up a new set of data, showing ship designs that were clearly Void Swarm in origin, but incorporating elements from dozens of other species. They don't just destroy civilizations. They absorb them. Technology, biology, tactical knowledge, everything. Sarah stared at the evolving ship designs with growing horror. You're saying they absorbed the Zephyrians? All 12 billion of them? Absorbed, harvested, integrated, David said. The Zephyrians are gone, but their knowledge, their technology, their biological distinctiveness have all been added to the swarm, which makes the enemy we're facing now far more dangerous than anything we fought before. The communications officer at a nearby station suddenly stood up. Sir, we're receiving priority signals from multiple sectors. Something's happening. David and Elena hurried over to the officer's station. Sarah and her team followed, watching as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Outer Rim colonies going dark, the officer reported. Same pattern as the Zephyrian disappearance. No distress signals, no evidence of fighting, just silence. Elena's face went pale. How many systems? 17 in the last 6 hours. And the pattern is accelerating. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. They're not just back. They're starting a new offensive. Not starting, David said quietly. Finishing. The Zephyrian harvest gave them everything they needed to complete their evolution. Now they're moving against the rest of the galaxy. The display showed the progression of dark zones spreading across the galactic map like a plague. Species that had existed for thousands of years were simply winking out of existence. The hegemony world's gone. The officer continued. The crystalline collective, no response. The mechanical syndicate. Wait, they're transmitting something. The room filled with static, then a mechanical voice came through the speakers. It was clearly artificial, but there was something wrong with it. Something that spoke of pain and desperation. This is Core Node Prime of the Mechanical Syndicate. We are under assault by unknown forces. Our quantum barriers have been breached. They are in our systems. They are in our minds. They are taking everything we are and making it theirs. We cannot stop them. We cannot even slow them. If anyone receives this transmission, do not come here. Do not try to help us. Save yourselves while you still can. The transmission cut off with a sound like screaming metal. The room fell silent except for the hum of machinery. Sarah looked around at the faces of the people who had been abandoned on this death world 50 years ago. They didn't look surprised. They looked resigned. How long do we have? She asked quietly. Based on their current rate of expansion, Elena calculated, they'll reach the core worlds in 3 months, Earth in 4. And the military response? David laughed, but there was no humor in it. What military? The Zephyrians were the backbone of galactic defense. Without them, the remaining species are fragments, traders and explorers and scientists, not warriors. Sarah thought about Earth's defenses, their ships, their weapons, their soldiers, all of it designed for fighting other humans or minor raiders. Nothing that could stand against what was coming. But you have a plan, she said, looking at David and Elena. You've been preparing for this. We have capabilities, David admitted. 50 years of development focused on one goal. surviving what we knew would eventually come. But capabilities aren't the same as a plan. What do you need? Elena and David exchanged a look. Then David turned back to Sarah. We need the galaxy to make a choice, he said. They can fight this threat with us as equals, sharing resources and accepting our leadership in military matters. Or they can face it alone while we protect ourselves. You're talking about a complete restructuring of galactic politics. We're talking about survival, Elena said bluntly. The old order is dead. The Zephyrians made sure of that when they abandoned us. Now something new has to take its place or everything dies. Sarah stared at the spreading darkness on the galactic map. In 4 months, that darkness would reach Earth. Every human world would face the same fate as the Zephyrians unless something changed. The choice was clear. Submit to the authority of the people they had abandoned, or face extinction alone. Looking around at the advanced technology and the dangerous humans who had built it, Sarah began to understand that the real question wasn't whether Earth would accept the terms. The real question was whether these evolved humans would still consider Earth worth saving. General Marcus Steele stood at the head of the War Council table, his presence commanding the attention of every person in the room. At 68 years old, he moved with the fluid grace of someone half his age, his body adapted to Infernus, gravity making him seem almost supernatural to Sarah's eyes. Commander Chen, he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent 50 years preparing for this moment. Your government has 3 days to make a decision. After that, we proceed with our own plans. Sarah looked around the council chamber. It had been carved from solid rock deep beneath the settlement, its walls lined with screens showing tactical displays from across the galaxy. The spreading darkness of the void swarm's advance painted a clear picture. Civilization was running out of time. General, with respect, 3 days isn't enough time for Earth to make a decision of this magnitude, she protested. Time is a luxury we no longer have, replied Dr. Vasquez, bringing up a new set of readings. Our deep space sensors show massive swarm formations moving toward the core systems. The Andorian Republic fell yesterday. The Trade Federation worlds went dark this morning. At this rate, they'll reach Earth's sector in 6 weeks, not 4 months. Torres studied the tactical displays with growing alarm. How are they moving? So fast? Even with Zephyrian technology, this kind of coordinated advance should be impossible. Because they're not just using Zephyrian technology, said Colonel Maya Santos, General Steele's tactical advisor. They're using Zephyrian strategy, hegemony logistics, crystalline collective quantum tunneling, and mechanical syndicate processing power. Every species they absorb makes them exponentially more effective. General Steele activated a holographic display showing Earth's current defenses. The comparison to what was coming toward them was devastating. Your homeworld has approximately 200 combat vessels, most designed for patrol duties against pirates. The swarm formations heading your way contain over 10,000 ships, each one incorporating the best technology from a dozen conquered species. Sarah felt sick looking at the numbers. What are you proposing? Integration, Steele said simply. Earth and the remaining free worlds place themselves under unified command. My command. We share all technology, all resources, all personnel. In return, we provide protection and the tools needed to survive what's coming. You're talking about the end of Earth's sovereignty. I'm talking about the continuation of Earth's existence, Steele replied bluntly. Sovereignty means nothing if everyone is dead. Colonel Santos brought up a new display showing the Forsaken Fleet. 47 ships that looked like nothing Sarah had ever seen. Sleek, predatory, armed with weapons that seemed to bend space around them. These vessels were designed specifically to fight the evolved swarm, Santos explained. Our weapons can permanently destroy swarm entities, not just delay them. Our armor can withstand their bioweapons. Our crews can outmaneuver their tactical adaptations. But there are only 47 ships, Sarah pointed out, against thousands of swarm vessels. 47 ships crewed by people who have spent their entire lives preparing for this war. Steele corrected. Every man, woman, and child on Infernus is a warrior by necessity. We don't have civilians here. We have soldiers who happen to do other jobs. Dr. Vasquez activated another display, this one showing training scenarios. Sarah watched in amazement. as children barely in their teens moved through combat simulations that would challenge Earth's elite special forces. We've spent 50 years creating the most effective military force in galactic history, Vasquez explained. Not just better soldiers, but better humans. Stronger, faster, smarter, more adaptable. Evolution driven by absolute necessity. You're asking Earth to submit to rule by a species that isn't even human anymore, Sarah said. We're still human, Steele replied, his voice carrying a hint of sadness. We're just human in a way that the rest of the galaxy made necessary. You abandoned us to become something that could survive the impossible. Now that impossible threat is coming for everyone else. Torres was studying the technical specifications of the Forsaken weapons. These energy signatures are incredible. How do they work? Carefully, said Chief Engineer Tom Harrison, approaching the group. We call them void crackers. They don't just destroy matter. They disrupt the quantum fields that allow swarm entities to regenerate. Meaning what exactly? Sarah asked. Meaning when we kill a swarm creature, it stays dead, Harrison explained. No regeneration, no resurrection, no coming back in a new form. Permanent death. Steele gestured to bring up footage from a recent battle. The screen showed Forsaken soldiers boarding a swarm bioship, moving through corridors that pulsed with alien life. What Sarah saw defied belief. The humans moved like dancers, flowing around swarm attacks that should have been impossible to avoid. Their weapons cut through creatures that had terrorized the galaxy like they were made of paper. This is from last week, Steele said. We intercepted a swarm scout ship at the edge of this system. It was trying to gather intelligence about Infernus. You're already fighting them? Sarah asked in shock. We've been fighting them for 30 years, Colonel Santos replied. Small engagements, probing attacks, testing our capabilities against theirs. They know we're here. They know we're dangerous. That's why they haven't tried to take this system. But they will eventually, Steele continued. Once they've absorbed enough of the galaxy to feel confident, they'll come for us. That's when the real war begins. Dr. Vasquez brought up a strategic analysis that made Sarah's blood run cold. Our projections show that even with our advantages, we can't win a defensive war. There are simply too many of them, and they're growing stronger with every species they absorb. So what's your plan? Sarah asked. Steele's expression became predatory. We don't wait for them to come to us. We go to them. Fast, hard, and without mercy. We hit their command structures, disrupt their absorption processes, and force them to fight on our terms instead of theirs. You're talking about going on the offensive against an enemy that's already conquered half the galaxy. I'm talking about doing what humans do best, Steele replied, adapting to impossible odds and finding a way to win anyway. Colonel Santos activated a display showing the proposed battle plan. It was audacious to the point of insanity. Strike. Forces would hit multiple swarm positions simultaneously, using captured technology to mask their approach. The goal wasn't to hold territory, but to cause maximum disruption and confusion. The key is speed and unpredictability, Santos explained. They're used to absorbing static defenses and conventional tactics. They're not prepared for an enemy that fights like we do. How do we fight? Sarah asked. Like we have nothing to lose, Steele said quietly. Because 50 years ago we lost everything that mattered. Our homes, our families, our trust in civilization itself. What we built here, we built from nothing. What we became out of necessity. We're not fighting to preserve the status quo. We're fighting for the right to define what comes next. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of people who had been forged by abandonment and betrayal into something harder than any army the galaxy had ever seen. They weren't just offering to help fight the swarm. They were offering to remake galactic civilization with themselves at the top. And if Earth refuses your terms? She asked. General Steele's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Then Earth faces the swarm alone. We'll remember them fondly while we build something better from the ashes. You would let our homeworld die? Commander, Steele said softly. 50 years ago, the galaxy let us die. We survived anyway. If Earth chooses pride over survival, that's Earth's decision to make. Sarah stared at the tactical displays showing Earth's pitiful defenses against the oncoming storm. The choice was becoming clear, and it wasn't really a choice at all. Submit to the authority of the abandoned, or face extinction with dignity. Looking at General Steele's implacable expression, she began to understand that he wasn't making threats. He was simply stating facts about the new reality of galactic power. The swarm's main invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace like a plague of metal locusts. 10,000 bioships, each one a kilometer long and bristling with weapons that had been perfected through the absorption of a dozen different species. At their head rode the command vessel, a monstrosity 5 kilometers across that pulsed with the stolen life force of billions of harvested beings. Admiral Catherine Ross watched the enemy fleet approach on her flagship's main screen, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was seeing. 3 months ago, she had been commanding Earth's Third Fleet, protecting trade routes from pirates. Now she stood at the center of the largest space battle in galactic history. "All ships report ready, Admiral," her communications officer announced. "Combined fleet strength, 800 vessels from 27 different species." It wasn't enough. Everyone knew it wasn't enough. The swarm had grown too strong, absorbed too much. But it was all they had. "Admiral," called out her sensor operator, "I'm reading massive hyperspace distortions at the edge of the system. Something big is coming through." Ross turned to look at General Steele, who stood calmly at the tactical station as if he were discussing the weather instead of the fate of galactic civilization. "General?" "Right on time," Steele said with satisfaction. "Signal all Allied vessels to maintain position and prepare for close support. The real fleet is arriving." Space itself seemed to tear open as 47 ships emerged from hyperspace. But these weren't the sleek vessels Ross had seen in the intelligence reports. These were predator ships, black as the void between stars, their hulls covered in markings that seemed to shift and writhe in the starlight. "How are they doing that?" her sensor operator asked in amazement. "I'm reading 47 ships, but my instruments keep losing track of them." "Stealth technology adapted from swarm bioships," Steele explained casually. "We've been studying their capabilities for 50 years. We know their weaknesses better than they do." The Forsaken fleet moved like a pack of wolves, spreading out in a formation that made no sense according to conventional tactics. They were outnumbered 200 to 1, yet they advanced on the massive swarm fleet as if they were the larger force. "All ships, this is Retribution Actual," came a voice over the communication system. Ross recognized it as Colonel Santos. "We are commencing Hunter Protocol. All Allied vessels maintain distance and provide covering fire as requested. Do not attempt to match our maneuvers." The swarm fleet responded to the approaching threat with typical efficiency. Bioships moved into defensive formations while smaller attack craft swarmed forward to engage the human vessels. Their weapons lit up space with energy beams that had been perfected through countless battles. Then the Forsaken ships opened fire, and Ross understood why General Steele had been so confident. The weapons didn't just destroy the swarm vessels, they unmade them. Bioships that had regenerated from complete destruction simply ceased to exist when touched by the strange energy beams. Attack craft that could adapt to any conventional weapon found themselves unable to evolve defenses against something that attacked the very foundations of their existence. "Impossible," breathed Ross's tactical officer. "Those swarm ships have armor that can withstand nuclear detonation. How are they just dissolving?" "Void crackers," Steele said with grim satisfaction. 50 years of research into how the swarm actually functions. They exist in a state of controlled quantum flux, constantly rebuilding themselves at the molecular level. Our weapons disrupt that flux permanently. The Forsaken ships moved through the swarm formation like sharks through a school of fish. They didn't engage in long-range bombardment or attempt to hold defensive positions. Instead, they closed to point-blank range and systematically eliminated every enemy vessel they encountered. Ross watched in amazement as a single Forsaken destroyer took on 5 swarm bioships simultaneously. The human vessel moved in ways that defied physics, dodging attacks that should have been impossible to avoid while returning fire with devastating accuracy. "How are they moving like that?" she asked. "Gravity manipulation technology reverse-engineered from the Crystalline Collective," Steele explained, "combined with reaction times enhanced by 50 years of evolution in heavy gravity. Our pilots don't just fly their ships, they dance with them." The tide of battle began to turn as the Forsaken fleet carved its way toward the swarm command vessel. Enemy ships that had never known fear suddenly found themselves outmatched by an enemy they couldn't adapt to or overcome. But the swarm wasn't finished. The command vessel began to pulse with energy, and Ross's sensors detected something that made her blood run cold. "General, they're calling in reinforcements. Massive hyperspace signatures all around the system." "How many?" Steele asked, his voice calm. 50,000 ships, maybe more." Steele smiled, and Ross realized with shock that he didn't look worried. He looked pleased. "Signal all Forsaken vessels," he ordered. "Execute Omega Protocol." The 47 ships suddenly changed formation, spreading out in a pattern that covered the entire system. Each vessel began to emit a strange energy field that made Ross's instruments go crazy. "What are they doing?" she demanded. "Something we've never tried before," Steele admitted, "but something we've been preparing for since the day we started building this fleet." The energy fields from the Forsaken ships began to interact with each other, creating a web of force that stretched across the entire star system. When the swarm reinforcements tried to emerge from hyperspace, they found themselves caught in a trap that turned their own quantum tunneling technology against them. Ship after ship materialized only to be immediately torn apart by gravitational forces that shouldn't have been possible to generate. The reinforcement fleet that should have ensured swarm victory instead became a cosmic graveyard. "Field saturation at 90%, reported Santos over the communications channel. "Beginning final assault on command vessel." The surviving Forsaken ships converged on the massive command vessel like antibodies attacking an infection. The swarm's flagship tried to defend itself, but its weapons had been designed to fight conventional fleets, not opponents who treated the laws of physics as suggestions. Ross watched in awe as human soldiers in power armor cut their way through the command vessel's hull and began fighting inside the ship itself. The feeds from their helmet cameras showed combat that looked more like an extermination than a battle. "They're not just fighting the swarm," she realized. "They're hunting it." 50 years on Infernus taught us one thing above all else," Steele said quietly. "Everything can be killed if you understand how it lives. The swarm thinks it's the apex predator in the galaxy. It's about to learn what real predators look like." The command vessel's death throes lit up the system as its collected life force was finally released. With their central node destroyed, the remaining swarm ships lost coordination and became easy targets for the combined fleet. In 6 hours, the largest swarm invasion force ever assembled had been completely annihilated. As the last enemy vessel died, Ross found herself looking at a galaxy forever changed. The swarm threat was ended, but in its place stood something new. Humanity had proven itself not just capable of survival, but capable of absolute dominance. "General," she said quietly, "what happens now?" Steele looked out at the debris field that had once been an unstoppable invasion force. "Now we rebuild, but this time we do it right. Under human leadership with human values protected by human strength. And the other species? They can join us as equals, or they can govern themselves as protectorates. But they'll never again have the power to abandon us when we become inconvenient." Ross thought about the implications of that statement. The galaxy that had abandoned 500,000 human soldiers on a death world now found itself under the protection of their descendants. The irony was complete. 6 months later, Commander Sarah Chen stood in the rebuilt Galactic Council chambers on New Geneva. The human flag flew highest among all the species' banners, not because of conquest but because of necessity. When the next cosmic threat inevitably emerged from the dark between stars, everyone knew who would stand against it. The Forsaken had risen from abandonment and betrayal to become the galaxy's shield. They remembered their origins, but chose to be better than those who had wronged them. As Sarah watched General Steele address the Council about new deep space sensor readings from beyond the galactic rim, she reflected on how completely the universe had changed. 50 years ago, humans had been useful allies who could be discarded when convenient. Now they were the apex predators of known space, and everyone else lived under their protection. The abandoned had become the guardians, and the galaxy was safer for it.